And none of my entertainers will charge you $50,000. You'll be glad to know that, Naomie.
Oh, awesome.
Might charge you something else, but they will not charge you that much. Jamel, are you on the line with me?
Good evening. This is Jamel joining.
Hey, Jamel, I'm glad that you're able to join this conversation. I've been talking, and I've mentioned her name to you before because I found her online, and I think that we know some mutual friends and everything, Miss Naomie Lucas, who's got Southern Wicked Lemonade, which is a moonshine company. You are working with Celeste, and you've got the beer company, Harlem Brewing. So y'all are basically, in this case, somewhat in the similar industry. So maybe y'all want to talk about how you got involved with Harlem Brewing, and maybe she could tell you a little bit about what she's been doing and everything, because that's part of what that whole conversation has been about. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Jamel, if you'll just tell us how you got involved with Celeste and Harlem Brewing.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you for having me, Mark, and congratulations, Naomie. I looked at your website. I learned about you through Mark, as he mentioned, and congratulations to all your success.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited about learning more about Harlem Brewery as well.
Okay, well, I work in the Harlem Beer Distributing Company, and there are two separate entities, as you know, in the ABC world. You know, the distribution is separate from the actual brewery in the beer world. So Celeste Beatty runs the Harlem Brewing Company, and she also opened up a collaboration brewery with Brianna Brake, who also is a Durham native. And so now we have two African-American women leading up a brewery in Rocky Mount. And the way that I became involved is I met Celeste about 15 or 17 years ago at a conference, and it was the first time I met a woman, an African-American, that informed me that she brewed beer. And I told her I was from North Carolina. She said she lived in Harlem, but she had roots in North Carolina. In fact, she was born and raised in Winston-Salem and attended Shaw University. So during that time, I was traveling quite a bit on the West Coast, and she mentioned that Sugar Ray Leonard, he was celebrating his 50th birthday party, and he wanted to get her beer from Harlem to Palisades, California. So it just so happened that week prior to his birthday party, I planned to be in California on a business trip, and I agreed to help her get the beer from Harlem to Sugar Ray Leonard's birthday party. And at the time, I think at that time I was first introduced to the challenges in distribution. I didn't know a lot about logistics or beer distribution, but when the beer arrived, Mr. Leonard, his sons, and his guests, they all were very interested. They loved the beer, and the first question they asked is, how do we get the beer in the stores? And that's when I began to see the real challenges with distribution, at least in the beer world. And so I returned back to North Carolina, and then sometime later, Celeste appeared on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and he awarded her the hardest working brewer award in the nation. And he asked her, where are you from? And when she said North Carolina, calls poured in from all over the country, but particularly from the South. And they asked the question of, how do we get the beer in North Carolina? So at that time, she asked me if I would help with distribution. And I gave it a long, hard thought. And I decided to apply for my ABC wholesale license. That took about a year. Once I went through that process, we opened up the doors, and we started within about 2 or 3 months. We secured 60 accounts, and we've been running pretty hard ever since. So that's how I was introduced into the craft beer and distribution world.
And both of you have talked about how hard it is to get these distribution deals. I know that, Naomie, that's some of the things that you've been talking to me online about and everything, is just how this whole process. And even you, Jamel, you talked about how y'all have gotten into a couple of stores, and, of course, y'all are in several restaurants here in the Durham and area, and I guess Raleigh as well as Chapel Hill. But that seems to be one of the main hurdles that people have to deal with when they're trying to bring a quality product, whether it's your moonshine vodka products, Naomie, or whether it's your beer. It seems to me that seems to be, like I was talking to Naomie about earlier, it seems like there's more roadblocks than there need to be. So I was just wondering if you could both address that, because it seems to me that seems to be the big drawback. A lot of people might have the idea of creating these products, but then they run into this hard case of having to try to find ways to actually get it to the mass public. And sometimes there's, like you said, you're from North Carolina, but you're not even in North Carolina, Naomie. And I know that y'all have been trying to get some other deals and everything. And I know some people try to get these box store deals, but even those, I understand, are not that easy to get.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. Do you want to take the question, and then I can take the liquor side if you want to take the other side?
Sure. I can talk to some of the challenges. I think normally, when you apply for a license, of course you have to get a federal license, going through the TTB process, the tobacco and alcohol, at the federal level. So once you secure that license, that allows you to apply for a wholesale malt liquor license, distribution license in a specific state. And I think the biggest challenge for me was just identifying a warehouse that could maintain the beer at a certain temperature level, but also had the latest alarm system, smoke detection. All of that is important. And finally, it has to be secured. So identifying a warehouse that could be caged, that could be, you could refrigerate the beer to keep it at a certain temperature. And with all the updated technological improvements, that was a challenge. Not being a large distribution company, we couldn't take on a 4,000 square foot building. So finding something that was not what was a decent enough size to bring the beer in that we needed, but not something that was a bit overwhelming for a small company. That was probably the longest, the biggest hurdle for me, is just identifying the location. After we found the location, which we store at Eastern Organics, which is based on Pettigrew Street, they refrigerate a lot of local farmers' products in the area. Once we identified that location, just really going through the city and getting the proper permits, getting the city to come out and inspect. So I would say the longest part for me was just, identifying that warehouse. And I looked at warehouses all over the state of North Carolina, but we wanted Durham because we knew if we could lock down Durham and get the accounts and saturate the market here, we could be successful going to Greensboro, Charlotte, and other markets. Today we distribute, and most of our customers in Durham are within 5 to 10 minutes of our warehouse. So that was probably the biggest challenge. But I think there's another question about like penetrating the Whole Foods and the larger grocery stores and the bars and the restaurants just not being known. That became a challenge. And one of the things that we did that I think was very different and unique as a distribution company is we started working with chefs to pair the food with the ingredients that are in our award-winning beer. For example, there is a Harlem Renaissance wit beer, and it's called Harlem. When you think of many wheat beers, you don't hear the name Harlem associated with it, but the brewer associates African-American culture. There's so many different flavors, different styles, music, entertainment. So when she created this beer, she brewed it with cumin, coriander, grains of paradise, and orange peel. So now you have a Harlem style layered with lots of different ingredients. And when we started selling this beer, the first thing I did is I met with a lot of chefs in the area, and I talked to them about the tasting notes and how you create an experience. And then I started videotaping the chefs, and they began to like the idea of pairing certain foods with the beer and enjoying all these tasting notes and these flavors in the beer. And if you look at our website or our Facebook page, you'll see we don't want to just sell a bunch of beer. We want to sell an experience. So I think taking a different approach and being somewhat innovative and creative in how we push our product, it did open a lot of doors for us, but it was very difficult initially because, Sylvia's in Harlem. Everybody knew about the beer in Harlem, but no one knew, even though Celeste grew up here, no one really understood the product or her beer. And I think that took some time to, this last couple of months to build that following and penetrate some of those markets that we just initially weren't able to get into. So I hope that answers the questions from, trying to get into the markets, but also trying to get into the distribution model.
Right.
And so on the whole ideal of alcohol is divided into two. There is a very strong line of demarcation between beer and wine and distilled spirits. They are as separate, as as the banks of the Nile River. And on the distilled spirit side, they have what you call a three-tier system in some states. So if you are a maker of distilled spirits, then you cannot be an owner in a restaurant, nor can you be an owner in a distribution company. In some states, they allow you to have your own distribution company, but in most states, the three-tier system exists. That's one. Two is when you talk about distilled spirits in places that have the three-tier systems, you have the gigantic distributors like Southern Glacier, Johnson Brothers, Empire, who else? Gosh, the list kind of goes on and on. Breakthrough. And so what happens is unless you're able to penetrate one of those distributors, it's very hard to get access to markets. And in the distilled spirits world, I remember having this conversation with former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. I said, you know, liquor laws in the United States are very, very antiquated. They are not built towards craft distilleries and craft breweries. In fact, the laws right now are really made for your big market, distributors that can afford the lobbyists in D.C. For me, as a distilled spirit maker, I said, you can't get a distributor unless you can prove to the distributor that people want to buy you, right? Well, how do I get people to want to buy me? Well, I have to get them to try my alcohol. How do I get my alcohol into a state that I'm not yet licensed for? I have to bring my alcohol in. So Mr. Holder was like, well, you know, are you saying that you break the law? And I said, I would never admit to breaking the law, but sometimes you have to go into the gray areas of the law in order to get a distributor, because I can't get anyone to want to buy my alcohol unless they taste my alcohol, but I can't get a temporary license to send in, you know, a couple of cases in so that I can go and have the tastings with business owners to, you know, I mean, even to keep an inventory sheet of the ounce pours that we do at each particular place that we go and, you know, solicit business from. I said it is a, it almost causes failure if you are of the mindset to persevere and to, you know, be able to expose yourself to the gray areas of the law. And because you literally, do what? Excuse me. Go ahead.
I said, it seems like it's even harder. I was getting ready to break in. I'm sorry. It seems like it's even harder for the distilled spirit industries, because when I think of both beer and wine, I think about all these events that go on around the country, and particularly around North Carolina, since that's where we're at, all of us that are in this conversation except for Dean. But because you have like those beer, I won't call them competitions, but these beer events, like the World Beer Festival that's held at the new ballpark now, and you got the beer magazine. There are wine magazines. There are wine tasting events that are on a regular basis. I don't see as many of those for the distilled spirit kind of side of the alcohol industry. Like I said, I'm not saying that they're not invited, but I'm just saying I haven't been to one in a while. But when I go, it's usually definitely focused on the beer side, maybe a little bit on the wine side, but I see hardly any of the distilled side.
Right. I mean, and, you know, honestly, it is that unless you are licensed in that state and unless you have a distributor, you know, it's illegal to bring your alcohol into a state. Well, how do you break the market then, right? How do you go beyond that? And I think that is the biggest question. Like, even with New York, you know, we're in talks now with a major distributor in New York. But it's taken us 2 years to get here. It's taken us, you know, being assigned by United Johnson Brothers, you know, Southern Glacier, to finally now have a talk with Empire, you know, in New York, to, you know, for someone to say, hey, you know, look at us. When we have people like Live Nation and other people that would love, you know, that have said, we would love to have your cocktails on the rooftop of our bar because we love what you guys stand for. Now, with a client like that, you know, can we please get a distributor? Someone, please, will you allow me to have